There we go. We are live. Okay, welcome everyone. So as we start to see some of you hop on, there we go. Say hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm excited to introduce you to Juliette. This is a first for me. I'm not chatting with you solo. I have a guest, and we're just going to really enjoy an inspiring conversation about art drawing based on Juliette's book. If you are in the artist lounge with me, let me know also in the chat and say, hey, we're just going to give everyone a few minutes, grab a drink, get cozy, maybe grab a sketchbook even or your notebook. You might want to take some notes as we go and even share some questions as well. So, welcome everyone. I'm glad to see there are so many of you who are able to join us. Okay, so as you're getting settled, I'd love to introduce you to Juliette. So, for those of you who are maybe new to the Artist Lounge and we haven't crossed paths yet, I'm Nikki Tricos, probably best known as Life Design or Watercolor Made Simple. I have a real passion for helping new artists really get to enjoy their creative practice and maybe expose you to a few new things that I've created for you here in the lounge. This is our second Creative Book Club chat, and this book and this artist and instructor and talented artist that I'm going to chat with today is a book that I came across really by accident. And I'm so glad when things like this happen because I feel like intuitively when you're drawn to something, the teacher, the tool, that sort of direction is just guided and brought to you. So when I got to find Juliette's book, it's one that I devoured, and I just knew I need to introduce it here for our lounge members and our next Creative Book Club. So, enough about me. I'm going to read a little bit of an intro so that you can get to know Juliette a bit, and then we'll start our conversation. So I am excited to welcome Juliette Aristides, who is an artist, an author, and an educator whose work has deeply influenced how artists see, observe, draw, and practice, which is something you know that we're doing in the lounge this month, but just in general. Is something that I am a big advocate for as well. Juliette is known for her thoughtful and classical approach to drawing and for helping artists to slow down, to see more clearly, and to build strong foundations that support a lifetime of creative growth. So her book, The Beginning Drawing Atelier, if you haven't picked it up yet, highly recommend it. It invites artists back to the essentials of seeing, practice, and learning to draw with intention. And the way that Juliette and I got to chat a little bit before we planned this event, the way Juliette describes the beauty of observation, I think is going to be really inspiring for you. So I hope all of this resonates with you. And I'm excited to get to know you, Juliette, a little bit more. If you could share with us maybe a bit about your background, how you came into art, maybe where you trained and what that experience looked like, I would love to hear more.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Nikki. It's super fun to get to meet you and to see the beautiful things that you've created. So I've been doing this a long time, and I think for many people, the impulse, whether you go on to be a professional painter or you just have a secret passion, kind of starts from the same thing, a geeky kid drawing alone.
Yeah.
Looking around and finding beautiful things that kind of parallel the world as it is. So we had, growing up, you have the family, you have all these other dynamics, but a secret self that notices things and gets pleasure from sources of beauty that might not be talked about. And for me, it was probably that simple that kind of caused me to seek out, well, how can I learn to do a better job of expressing what I see with technical skills of moving my hand. And when I started studying, it was, you couldn't just go to art school and be trained. It was a lot of theory, and there were classes that would give you, 3 hours once a week for 9 weeks, that kind of thing. And I really wanted to do a deep dive. And so trying to find technical training was really the first half of my life. I went from one school to another. I found a small studio called Barnstone Studios, and got my first introduction to truly passionate instruction through a guy named Myron Barnstone. And once you have a taste for that kind of engagement, like somebody who is living life with the dial turned all the way up, you kind of know what to look for. And then went to PAFA, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, and from there to Minneapolis to train in the ateliers. It was at Pennsylvania Academy that I first heard that there are these small studio schools that have training that has been some form of 19th century training that still existed from one teacher passed to another to another. So dove into that, did a few ateliers before moving to New York City and studying National Academy of Design and so on and so forth, landing with Jacob Collins and starting Water Street Atelier, which is now Grand Central, and then moved out at 28 to start my own atelier in Seattle. So that was kind of my, you know,
Journey. Yeah.
to dive into the educational part.
Can I, interject a little bit? I have a question. When
Mhm.
you were young, did you always know that you see the world different or that you wanted to express yourself as an artist? And did you have anyone around you who were also artistic? What was that like? And then I wanna ask you about the atelier.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like people like Marshall McLuhan, who, is a Canadian fellow who commented on media environments. He said it's always the artists and the poets that kind of go ahead of things. And because they operate slightly outside the systems as it is by not always by their own choosing, they're able to speak into a culture in a particular way. And I think for all the art kids or those that harbored a secret art self, growing up, you it would be kind of a misnomer to say that artists are people that are made, not born, and that there's an element of truth to that in the sense that nobody's born with the skills to be able to be a painter or a draftsman. You really have to seek it out. So, nobody's born with talent. But that being said, you know who you are if you don't quite fit in because you like to experience things deeply and a little bit of a slower entrance ramp. You're more likely to listen than you are to speak. You're more likely to get lost in a museum than in a football game, that kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, I totally relate, and I'm sure there are people tuning in who can relate to that. And I think even, like, having that passion, so maybe it's not this natural talent that we're born with, but it's the passion to seek and to learn and to find, opportunities.
Yeah, and it's the same with, there's no difference between poets and writers and maybe even photographers. And perhaps you pick any field, and there's people who are able to see a little bit ahead of
Mhm,
something. And it always starts with sight, and it takes a lot longer for the hand to catch up.
mhm.
The artist and the writer are the same person, just different media.
I love that. I think we'll get to that, talking about observation and getting that hand to express. I like that connection, and we'll get to that in a question. But can you explain to us a little bit about what really an atelier is and that experience, and maybe even just, yeah, that feeling of being in an atelier and connected to it, because a lot of us are maybe, we're self-taught, we don't have an art background, and that can feel a little bit intimidating to even think about studying in an atelier. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, if you atelier is just another word for studio. And in the last, 100 years, and I think things are shifting now for a number of reasons, you're less likely to find the slow acquisition of skills in an art school. And some of that's the inheritance of the Romantic Revolution, or this idea that the artist has kind of tapped into a lightning rod of creativity and energy, and that energy alone produces just this sort of electrifying output, and it's not linked to skill. And in fact, if you took the slow plodding, kind of just trying to get a little bit better all the time, maybe that was a mark against you actually being a true artist. And that's kind of an or an inversion of the entire history of art and art education, where it really was a skill that was learned like playing a musical instrument. If you think of, you can have the most talented person in the world, and at some point they had to start learning the scales. And
Mhm.
or and perhaps a more apt analogy is writing. I mean, how many people would think that they don't have an aptitude for read or write? You know, if I was never taught, I would think that I simply lacked the capacity to do it. But the fact is I wasn't taught, and a lot of people are denied their birthright by not being taught drawing. So, but anyway, the atelier, when I was studying, it was antithetical. Arts institutions were really coming down hard on ideas related to craft and skill. And so I really looked around a lot and got nudges and advice because the internet didn't exist, go here or go there. So if you think of an atelier as basically the complex act of painting being broken down into incremental steps. Much like if you were writing, you learned how to do a vertical, a horizontal, a diagonal, and you put it all together. All of a sudden, the letter A appears. Um, and so, what happens is you get this technical language, and it's absolutely teachable, and anybody can learn it, you know, really anybody. And then where the magic happens is as it gets integrated into our personalities and we begin to express our own unique DNA, our own handwriting through it when we're no longer copying anybody else's style. It's just ours to use, you know.
I
Uh,
love that, and I think that you hit a really important point that I want everyone to sit with for a moment. It's learning the keystrokes, right? And it's that repetition of maybe copying and reproducing those same strokes over and over again, that you then start to bring in your own artistic style and personality, and that's how your art style as an artist really develops. So it's the starting point, and I'm thinking about penmanship as you're chatting because I don't know if penmanship is taught anymore. I know that when we went to school, you learned how to print, you learned cursive writing, but I think it's even that very basic form of, putting the strokes together to make the letters. And then you can bring in your own personality to create the hand lettering that is yours. I love that. And I think that's a really great explanation because I think when we think of an atelier, I know that it sounds more formal. And I think the training is just perhaps a little bit more traditional in how it's taught and approached. And then it makes me think even I'm gonna go off script too, because I have questions for you, but it makes me even wonder, what is your thought on even just tracing to kind of get your hand moving? Because some of us, aren't used or aren't comfortable with holding a pencil and, maybe getting into more drawing and sketching. So I'm curious what your view is on that to get, maybe a little bit more hand-eye coordination or a little bit more muscle memory and comfort in terms of learning how to draw and sketch and putting it down on paper.
yeah, I'd probably say not tracing per se because of Uh, there's reasons why somebody would trace and transfer something that would be really useful, but in terms of training your eye, uh, probably not exactly that. I think practicing and doing master copy work is really outstanding, and that's a great thing to be able to do to choose work that is suited for you to be able to copy and get better at specific things. And there's a whole lot of ways of copying and source material. So, for example, early American sketchbooks, the way that art was taught in the past, Americans loved these how-to drawing books because it showed you how to kind of break things down and get into the head and the logic of it. And so we've kind of lost our taste for it, but things like that, seeing those fundamental beginning, building blocks. So the Charles Bark book is one that's super popular. It was a 19th century how-to book, essentially, uh, made by Jerome and the artist Leon Jerome and the printmaker Charles Bark, and they have the beginning stage of a drawing and the end stage of the drawing. So you copy one or or both, but at least the beginning stage over and over, and you get it better, you get better. But I would also say handwriting. If you think in the past, you're talking about penmanship and you see the old masterworks and they have their long form script, they're writing everything. And then in the margins, you would see, Da Vinci's notebooks. And on the side, there's all these little diagrams. I mean, who knows how our hands have been hampered by the fact that we're clicking on a keyboard all day rather than actually holding a pencil or pen. So that kind of back and forth is super useful.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny, anytime I'm in a museum gallery, if I see artist sketchbooks, I beeline right to those first because I feel like those initial marks and process are more exciting for me at times than seeing a finished piece. So
Did you have my sketchbook with you? Because I've actually created a book, two of them, one based on figure and a beginning drawing one, which is kind of recommended, uh, kind of a very bite-sized atelier pieces into understanding how to see like a draftsman so that you get a lot better as you practice. But
yeah, so that's
in the chat.
yeah, we'll have to do that. And what I'll do is when we do a little recap email, I'll send everything out again. But yeah, so your drawing book is the one that I literally sketched with my morning coffee every morning for a few weeks. I'm actually in Victoria, so I had the book to pack with me, but I don't have it physically to show you.
Okay, I don't have it either.
See, we're artists. That's how organized we are when it comes to that. We're great at art and self promotion, maybe not so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. I love that because I think sometimes we think about, tracing and if it's going to because I focus on watercolor, if tracing is going to help you sit to paint, then, just do what you have to do so that you can connect. And I agree with we're just not doing enough tactilely with like sketching and drawing and holding books and tools and things like that because we're so digital. So for me, for sure, 2026 is definitely leaning into more taking breaks from those opportunities, especially as it's just like a human expression of who we are, right? To be able to create. I think that does so much for our mental, emotional, physical health too, not only just from our joy of making art. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's one of the other blessings of an atelier, or if you think of it just as being in an artist studio or with an artist where your focus is on uh, the beauty of the skill and getting just a little bit better all the time in terms of that form of being able to express what you see. The greatest advantage to me when looking back was simply that you could shut the door on the world. And when so many things are happening, there's an enormous pressure on people. Your competition is every time you open your phone, you're seeing people who are better, faster, thinner, whatever, are
person.
speaking than will ever be. And, uh, and that will really squash somebody's spirit. But the beauty of art is there's a physicality to it. And no one is going to be a better version of you, Nikki, than you. So if you've lost some of that impulse to create just because you're so freaking demoralized by looking at the phone, it's an end of story. But in the atelier when I was studying, I was able to spend 10 years without looking. There was no screen. It was me against myself with a community of people who just loved to make things. And that was perhaps its overarching strength. So if we can do that for each other or give each other that kind of grace as we're working, that's wonderful, humanizing.
I think even with what we're seeing on social, I mean, social is connecting us, right? And even in having
Mhm.
this opportunity, but I feel like it's just over curated and it's seeing the messy stuff. And I think that's why I'm always so drawn to sketchbooks. And I feel like even these days, sketchbooks need to be this finished product because we want to share it on social, where it should be the pages that are, skewed or your color mood board hasn't turned out or your sketches haven't turned out because I feel like that process is what we're lacking when we're not in a formal setting to study art. We need to see the messy stuff and the stuff that doesn't turn out to know that it's okay to have those messy bits and the unattractive, not aesthetic not filtered, right? Moments. And I think that is just our life with social media. Again, I feel two ways about it. I'm very, I use it very strongly, but I also feel very strongly about how it's been used. Um, so I want to invite everyone to please, if you have a question that you want me to ask Juliette, I'm happy to do that. Pop it in the chat. Juliette, I wonder if you can speak a little bit. So we talked about drawing as a practice. Talk about your approach to, starting with those first few forms. What do you recommend to artists in terms of being able to self-critique? Because sometimes we don't have the opportunity to be next to someone who can instruct us, guide us a little bit. If we are doing self-studying, so using your book, for example, what would you recommend artists look for as they're doing self-critiques to start to improve? Because sometimes I feel like that is a little bit of a sticking point for some as they're growing and learning.
Yeah, self-critique, it's, you wanna be just critical enough that you're constantly improving, but not so critical that you're demoralized even for 1 minute, because there's no point to that whatsoever. You'll be surprised at how unfiltered family and friends are, and especially family, and you'll begin to notice even, like, 1 moment's hesitation as they're looking at your work, and you'll know they don't like it. And
Right.
they sometimes are very articulate about why, so you can always get somebody around you to say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And go for some of those honest voices. But, yeah, I'd say that one of the things that happens to artists as you're working is that your eye gets tired quite quickly. And so if you think of it for writing, for example, if you're producing an essay, you write it, but then if you go back and read it right away, you won't be able to tell what's wrong or if you're missing a word. I mean, we even know for text, if we include a double word, but we don't catch it because we just wrote it, we're too in it. And so distance does a lot for freshness of vision. And so you'll be surprised if you just shut your sketchbook or if you turn your drawing to the wall for a couple days and you flip it back, you will notice and be able to self critique as if it's somebody else's work. And so extending that freshness of vision is a big help.
So
Um,
stepping away from the work and not being so close to it, um, giving yourself that time.
Time. And so you can come back over there's a lot of pressure to get work started and finished the same day, I think. And so if you extend that timeline to have multiple projects going and you extend it over a week and then see how much, incremental gains, the last percentage, 5, 7% of a work, I mean, to someone they could come in and it looks finished. But that last round of corrections can often really push your skill set up into what you're demanding from your piece. And allowing yourself that kind of time is helpful. Another thing when you're beginning, yes, the tracing. Yes, if you're doing watercolor, the reason I said anti-tracing was mostly for if the goal is to improve drawing, then you want to hit on the drawing specifically quite hard without intervention. But if you're doing masterworks or master copy work, having the work the exact same size as, printing work you're copying the exact same size as you're drawing it, having it next to it, like actually aligned like with a T square kind of thing, so that you can flick your eye back and forth from one to the other. You're going to constantly be making micro corrections. And if you think of it like those old highlights magazines where you look around and you have to find the difference between two
Mm.
pictures. And at first you think, oh, they're entirely the same. And then you see, oh, there's one extra stripe on that guy's sneaker and, find all those things. In the drawing, it kind of functions that same way.
That's really interesting because I love drawing portraits and exploring portraits, and it's again something I've self-studied. And I notice when I do have a reference physical, not on my phone, not on whatever, and it is the size that I want to replicate it in, my portrait, I feel, turns out better. I get the personality of, who I'm trying to capture and the nuances. And I think you also hit a different point that I connected with. We talked about this a little bit where I did do an intensive workshop at an atelier in Toronto where we worked on a portrait for 3 days straight. And it was the first time I had done anything for 3 days straight. And I can tell you the difference between those last few hours of creating the really fine transitions with values or the fine details really brought that portrait to life versus my ADHD. I was probably done by the second day. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready for something new. I need to refresh. But it really does. It's the, taking the time to add in, I guess, the final details and the transitions again, value that I saw a difference for sure.
Well, if you think about how hard it is, we get very, very good at a certain rut. Like there's certain things we become very, very good at. So we can kind of streamline those. So the time consuming small gains that we get on all the additional hours after that point, it will get easier and will get quicker, but that's the growing edge. And so you're going to get the most resistance at that point. So
Yeah.
if folks kind of remember that there's forces at work against your growth and it kind of shows up in that kind of squirreliness we get when we want to be done. And so if we can get a taste for that kind of slower timeline and enjoying it for the act itself apart from the image we get at the end, that will also help extend the timeline because you get pleasure from it.
And I think that too, that's our society of like we don't slow down enough anymore. So we're not in the moments of just, sort of taking our time with things. It's always that rush, rush, rush. And I see it in my art and my personal art practice too. So that's very interesting. I hope everyone is getting some nuggets because everything that you're sharing with us, Juliette, is speaking to me. So I'm going to go to a question just so maybe we can see what everyone has on their mind. So there's questions about sketchbook, and I have a question about observation and sketching or drawing using a reference in person versus a photograph. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what does your personal sketchbook practice look like? Do you carry a sketchbook with you? When you are working on your own personal art, is it often, are you using a real life sort of example, whether it's portrait, still life, or are you using a photograph? Yeah, maybe share about your process a little bit.
Yeah, I will do a whole mix of things. I don't stick with one necessarily. My first love is figure drawing, and I'm not sure if
Mhm.
it's I spent the most amount of time doing that, but a lot of figurative work in that way. And I'll alternate between drawings and different mixed media around drawing figures, and then still life casts, some landscapes, interior, hybrid, all that stuff. And I love to work from life, and so that changed during the pandemic, when working from life was harder, but in my studio, um, the paintings I have set up right now, which are interior studio stuff and still life, are from life, and so, that's often my preference, but that's the way I trained, and so it began to enjoy the particular effects of light that are changing that could drive some people crazy, but that interaction with the model or interaction with there's things that happen with color, and it's not always possible for people. But to do a little bit of that is nice. I would recommend trying it as a kind of growing edge, which sometimes it's awkward looking when it's done from life, and it's less good than the stuff that you do from photographic sources.
Mhm.
You'll get a particular kind of engagement and presence as those sort of tendrils of you engaging with the world that people can find rewarding in another kind of way. I don't know
I'm
if that
curious.
makes sense.
Sorry to cut you off. I'm curious about any maybe advice you have around using a reference, whether you're on plein air, I'm thinking about landscape or portraiture, or even setting up a still life, and how some new artists have a hard time seeing maybe tonal value or color. What are some, I don't know, it's probably a massive process, but what are some just starting points that maybe you can give? Because again, I think your perspective on observation and training the eye are really beautiful. So maybe can you speak to that a little bit about how a new artist maybe what they can look for or how they can start to develop their observation skills?
Yeah, I'd say that Um, when beginners start working from life without training, one of the biggest things you run into is a particular kind of literalism, because you really want it to look like what it is. And so the biggest kind of split, I would say, at that juncture between somebody who's coming in with no training and with just a deep appreciation is that. And I would say where that splits, and I'm not sure I'm going to be the most helpful in this way because these things are hard to describe just using language alone.
Yeah.
Um, but what we tend to look for when we go from that to, you know, the lineage of art training, not that with the history of art kind of subdivides around the time of the invention of the photograph. It forks out in very, very different ways. And so if you go back to that time when people were being trained, it was very much more like how you would learn to do letters. You would look for lines of force and direction and pattern and squinting down and kind of seeing general angles and directions, starting more abstractly. So, in a weird way, when you look back at work from the past, you say, oh, it's so realistic. But often what it's starting from is a fairly abstract background. I would say if somebody's just getting started, developing a taste and a love of a thing is going to be your most powerful motivator, and that will be a driver, that spark uh, towards continued growth. And you almost don't have to worry about it because what Nikki said is right. Once you start developing a love, or you pick something up, or life is kind of steering you in a particular way, the teachers are going to show up, the opportunities are going to show up, and you'll be kind of one of those people in the desert with one of those divining rods for water. You will find it. So that might be the most helpful thing is cultivate the love and taste through exposure to good work.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And get Juliet's book to help you see shapes and form and values. Come to the artist lounge where we'll develop even more of that. And I think too, sometimes we're looking for an answer to fulfill something that we're working on. And it really is truly exploring. So finding the resource to help teach you or guide you, taking the class, whether it's in person, online, and then the practice. And, we've had some questions about if you carry a sketchbook, which you asked, and how long do you practice? If someone is just starting out, or maybe they're emerging and they're really starting to develop, Barb's also asking about developing your skill. Maybe describe to us what practice looks like and what you would recommend um, yourself if you were, maybe giving some advice to new artists. And what does that, practice sort of look like, or that experience of practice look like?
Yeah. So there's one thing that, uh, you know, we tend to think of skill be developing skill as antithetical to personal voice. And in the past, that was really not such a thing. People didn't worry about self expression in quite the same way. And if I've got my youngest is a 20-year-old guy, and he's in college, and I'm editing his papers for him. And I can absolutely see when he wrote it, and I don't even have to ask him when he's pulled source material from other places. I'm reading through, and in 1 minute it's him, and the next minute it's not. He's not trying to cultivate a voice. He's just trying to get his paper done. The voice comes
Before the due date.
or the due date, and the voice comes through. So
Yeah.
I wish there was a little bit less hand wringing about that. No one can separate you from your presence and who you are. Uh, it will show through. So I would just encourage people to develop the skill as much as you can and the love of it as much as you can by allocating time. And I've written 3 books on drawing, 3 books on painting, specifically with the goal of providing a roadmap so that people don't have to do what I did, which was 10 years of playing, what is it when you put the pool ball, pool ball or what pool, where you just take it and it ricochets all over the map, that you don't have to do that. But it's hard if you're on your own. It really is.
Yeah, I agree because if you can save and I know through your book, so The Inner Artist is also a beautiful one that I got to read of yours, but it's, saving others the time and maybe the headache that you went through the process, and sharing, like, the really useful technique important bits, I think, so I think that's what you were alluding to, so, yeah.
It's tough. It would be like, how does somebody, you're going to play the piano. It becomes self-evident that you have to practice a little bit and there's a way to do it. But aside from that, you know, it's
What
fun.
happened? Yeah,
It exactly. But Barbara wrote in about working hard to develop skills, but don't see personality. The more the skills come into play, the more that gets integrated. Just watch. When I first was studying, and I would spend a month on a figure drawing. Literally, they'd hire the model the first of the month. The end of the month, the model will disappear, and that would be the drawing. And it was that amount of time. I can now do a drawing in a couple hours in the same time it took me the entire month to do, just because, for the same reason, when we're driving in a new city, we have our roadmap and or our phone, and we're carefully tracking, and there's one way to get there and we don't want to make any mistakes. But by the time you've lived in that town and you've done that route 100 times, you know the back end ways, you know the front end ways, to get there, alternate routes, and you own it. And so, Barbara, I'd just say eventually you're going to own this stuff and you'll do it any way you want, and your personality will come back if you've seen it disappear.
yeah. I think that key is the repetition and the practice, which, again, coming back to again and again. I wanna talk a little bit about, sort of our inner critic and sort of that self-doubt, because I think mindset and the perspective for how we see ourselves through the process is really important. So what advice would you give to artists who and again, Barbara, you've got some really great points that you're bringing up, but what advice would you give to artists who maybe feel like they should be further along in their skill and their practice? And maybe it's mindset that is creating a little bit of self-doubt or that struggle. Do you have any advice or your perspective?
Yeah. I think the biggest advice around that is this somehow the idea that there's a single person on earth that doesn't wrestle horrifically with that same issue. And it's for the same reason why, we question our own credibility all the time. So, for example, when I look at Nikki, she is perfect, absolutely perfect. And everything she does is articulate and so spot on. And I've never seen Nikki do anything but absolutely succeed. But when, you look at yourself in the mirror, you know all the failures. I don't. I'm just seeing you at face value. And when other people look at our work or see what you've accomplished, they're not seeing any of those mistakes, but that doesn't help the back end story. It doesn't help that stuff go away. And the trouble with that inner critic is it really is a joy robber and a confidence robber. And so I'm reading this book. I don't know, probably a whole lot of you have read it, is by George Saunders, and he wrote the book A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. And I just read and it's his analysis of seven Russian masters' short stories where he's analyzing them, and it's really, really good. And he said the funniest thing, and I haven't heard anybody articulate it like this, so I don't know if I can go into it for a minute.
Yeah,
But
please.
he said, that here he is, he's a brilliant writer and he's been really trying to write these stories in the form of the people that he admired, these great Russian writers or Hemingway, that kind of thing. And he said no one got any pleasure from his writing because he was trying so hard to make things work and people could see the amount of time he spent on it and so on and so forth. And he had this epiphany, and I won't go into what it is, but that 3/4 of the way up the hill of Hemingway Mountain, that he was never gonna make it to the top. Nobody was liking his writing, and so he had to go back down and see this little tiny shit hill, And that was his hill. It had his name on it. And he said, it might be shit, but it's got his name. And so he's just by getting better and working as hard as he can, he hopes to help it grow. And the sense of ownership that he had, he said that somehow trying his best, he felt like he had let down the form, this great form he's been striving for. And I feel like that all the time. I feel like I go into the studio and let down the form. I've spent my life studying these grandmasters. So the only thing I can hope for is that there's something of myself worth preserving in all this. And at the very least, it's a great life, you know?
Yes, how lucky are we to
Yeah,
express
to do
that
that.
way. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Maybe we'll have to pop the name of the book as well in there because I love reading and I'm all about picking up new and interesting books that are recommended. So
Yeah.
amazing. Okay, how are we for time? Oh my gosh, our conversation is just
Think we have time
rolling.
2 more
Yeah,
questions.
let's do that. I think I'm looking at my notes for what I wanted to chat about, and I think you've given us that and so much more. So I'd love to open it up if we have a few questions, because I'd love to hear what maybe others want to hear from you. And I know they're praising your book and anything by Juliette. I've read two of them, like I said now, and I'm excited. You have a new one coming up. Maybe do you want to share a little bit about that?
I had one that came out in the spring, and it's the
Okay.
least, uh it's very much specifically for the artist. It was the inner life of the artist, and I made Nikki that when I forced her to buy it. And so,
Yeah. I'm
um,
happy you forced me. It was
I
great.
I feel like the biggest struggle, artists are bringing good medicine into the world. So I feel like now more than ever, we have to encourage each other's spirit because it is almost a human preservation movement at this point, and the role of art is changing. And so everybody who takes the time to kind of put pen to paper or pencil to paper and kind of cultivate what's happening in here is going to have a more complex, questioning, uh, thoughtful relationship to so many other things. And so, in a way, the book was designed to be encouragement and for the artist in that way. So, I guess we have one more question. Nancy wrote, "How do you feel about art that is loose and whimsical? You think it should be taken less seriously?" I would say absolutely not, because you know there's a good and bad examples of every kind of cuisine in the world. I go to my great favorite Indian restaurant, and I avoid others. Uh, Mexican, Italian, you know, whatever, you name the cuisine, there's practitioners that almost channel a high art of living through their ability and the way they see it and the way they do it. And the same thing um, with expressive art, it is one range of emotion. And I think probably a healthy personality would have all of the above to some degree. But, I hang out with friends when I'm going out to have a fun girls' night out. I pick the fun ones. I don't bring the ones that would rather be sitting in front of a fire reading, but I love to do that too. And so anyway, I would say no, there's no wrong answer. And in fact, some of the draftsmen that don't show their work, I'm thinking specifically of, I was in Italy and I saw a show and it was of Pontomo's drawing, and he was such a weirdo. I mean, you look at his drawings and you know he was a very strange guy, but his drawings are absolutely sublime. And so I went back with my sketchbook and I had a day to copy them. And I spent hours trying to copy a drawing that I'm sure he just dashed off. Being able to have that kind of fluency channels its own form of mastery. So, Nancy, no, you go for it.
Love
And
that. Knowing who Nancy is, I'm glad that Nancy, you asked that question. And thank you, Juliet, for answering it because I think there's different styles of art, whether it's illustrative or it's, a bit more traditional or it's whimsical, it's expressive. It's just like you said with cuisines. You could go to your local family owned restaurant and have a gorgeous, beautiful meal that was so fulfilling to enjoy and to be in that environment. Or you could be at a Michelin star restaurant and have that experience. It's still food. It's just the way that it's presented and it's still nourishing us. It's still creating that experience. So I'm all for whatever art comes out. It is important and it doesn't need to be serious or, and again, that's even the way that what stopped me from doing art when I was a child is I felt like it had to be this important, really deep, reflective expression that was, perfect or realistic. So I love that. Thank you. Okay, just and to respect your time, is there anything else that you wanted to leave us with before we close up our conversation? And will you come back and chat with us again down the
Oh,
road?
it's been so much fun. Thank you so much, Nikki, for having me on. And I would just say, parting thought is to follow your energy, follow what brings you alive or makes you feel alive and excited. And that's a very good, that's something in you kind of springing, uh, to attention when you come in the presence of something. And in art, that will lead you. It led me across the country and it led you to me and me to you. And so, respect. Thank you for having me. And thanks to everybody for taking the time to be here and for your great questions.
My pleasure. Thank you again for taking your time to be with us. And for everyone who wants to explore Julia a little bit more, her website is aristidesart.com. I will put it in the notes. I'm going to send out an email with the recap from today. And everyone here in the lounge, thank you for showing up again and again and continuing to learn with me and explore with me and allowing me to present you with some great conversations and some different artists and instructors. And yeah, thank you so much, Julia. I loved our conversation. I would love to have you back. And
Thank you so much, Nikki.
okay, bye everyone. That was great. I'm going to wrap up actually because I have a few minutes. I really did enjoy our chat today. I hope you did too. And thank you. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions for me, maybe let me know. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. I am continuing my 30-day sketching challenge. I will share a little bit about what I have been drawing. So please share in the chat as well. If you aren't a member of the lounge and you want to join us, come try us out for a month, see what we're doing. And expect on February the 1st. Oh, I got thumbs up. Here we go. Expect on February the 1st, our new theme is coming out for the lounge. We are going to explore some contrast, light and dark, and painting some really fun night scenes. I'm excited actually for our live painting session that is happening in February because we're going to get really rich with our watercolor painting and create some really beautiful opaque petals. My pleasure, Diane. Thank you, everyone, for bringing your questions. I think it really adds to the conversation and allows you an opportunity to have someone else's perspective. And Juliette is very trained. Her atelier, I would love to do a class with her, actually. Wouldn't that be a fun retreat to go to Juliette's atelier and to do a class with her? I was struck by her book and the way that she explained techniques, things that I'd already heard before, but the way that she laid them down in her book were just incredible. They were reminders to me, and I really was drawn to it. So when I felt courageous enough to reach out to her to come and join us for a chat, she was happy to, and it was a hell yeah, which was fantastic. So I'm glad that it worked out. And so we will share the replay for this live. So if you want to join us in the conversation again, you're welcome to. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. And so nice to see so many of you, especially familiar names. Okay. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. And I will see you in February.